part 2 of our Halftimes and Harmonies March Madness special. And as promised, I will be diving into the women's tournament that we've had thus far. And just like the men, I will be going over some surprises, things we expected, and a nice preview of the Final Four that is yet to come. But first, before that, I kind of want to mention how crazy it is that the women, if you play on the second day of the Elite Eight games, for the women, you only get 3 days to prepare, whereas for the men, you get 5. And I know the NCAA is trying their best, and honestly, they're not doing well enough to provide equity, but it's unfortunate that, the entire tournament, the women have played a day later than the men, and now all of a sudden it's flipped for when the stakes are the highest. Like, that doesn't make sense to me, and I think it might actually impact the performance because 3 days is much different than 5. And so it's it's kind of crazy, and I think something needs to be done about that. Okay, but diving in. So I'm gonna start with things we expected from the women's tournament. So I really expected Notre Dame. I know it was probably like a surprise that they lost to, Maryland and whatnot, but that was definitely expected. I was actually slightly surprised they made it as far as they did, especially without their star player in Olivia Miles. She definitely helped bolster that team up to where it was, and they definitely were better with her. But I think they did pretty well without her. And obviously they ended up losing to Maryland, which is unfortunate. And our Final Four teams, unlike the men, this Final Four feels right. Obviously there are a few surprises here and there as to how things shook out, but this Final Four just feels right and it feels good. But going into the few surprises that we've had a few more surprises than in women's tournaments past. Usually the women are a lot easier to predict than the men, but this year, men and women both said, you thought. So some surprises I have for the women is like Miami, number 9 seed, making it to the Elite Eight. I thought they would lose to Villanova and Maddie Siegrist, a fantastic player, and I think she's going to shine in the WNBA. I thought they were going to lose to Indiana, that great squad, but they ended up ultimately losing in the Elite Eight to LSU. But I do think they did really, really well, and for a team that's not really known for doing that well, I think they ultimately did pretty well. I think another surprise is Stanford going out in the round of 32. That was really, really interesting. I don't know what happened to Stanford. I think I saw, glimpses of them struggling throughout the year, but I thought they pulled it together like they usually do for the tournament. But no, they ended up losing to Ole Miss in the round of 32, and we're sitting on the couch for the Sweet 16. And also, speaking of sitting on the couch now, UConn, they definitely were plagued by injuries all year, and in Azzi Fudd's first game back, they weren't, or second game back actually, they weren't able to pull it together, and I think definitely that team definitely needs Paige Beckers to succeed the way they can. Unfortunately, she was out the entire year with an ACL injury. I pray and hope that she makes it back next year because I miss seeing her on the court, and she's a fantastic ball player, and I need to see more of her, and hopefully she doesn't have another season-ending or season-hindering injury next season. And so UConn is on the couch for the first time in 15 years. This is the first time in 15 years they haven't made the Final Four. So that's a long time. That's a decade and a half they had that a Final Four included UConn every year. Do I think it's the end of a dynasty? Not so much. I don't know, because programs do have their down years, obviously. And obviously people think the Alabama dynasty is over, but still Alabama is the perennial program in college football, and everybody strives to be Alabama and Nick Saban. So I do not think the UConn dynasty is like over, but it's definitely dwindling for sure. But UConn is still the I guess the premier basketball team, basketball program, women's basketball program in the country. And also, I think a slight surprise was Louisville in the Elite Eight. And I do think that they have a very good ball team. They made it pretty far in tournaments past. With Haley Van Lith, I think she's coming back for another year, so that's exciting to see. She's a great player, has a lot of passion, has a lot of heart, runs her mouth a little bit, which, I always enjoy. But I do think Louisville making the Elite Eight was a little bit of a surprise, truthfully, and I think they had an easier path because they didn't have to go through Stanford. But nonetheless, they made a pretty good run this tournament. So moving into our Final Four preview, we have South Carolina playing Iowa and LSU playing Virginia Tech on Friday. Tomorrow. So South Carolina and Iowa obviously is going to be the blockbuster matchup of the year. I'm pretty sure this is what the bracket makers predicted and wanted when they made the bracket. It's going to be superstar showdown between last year's player of the year and just recently named this year's player of the year in Aaliyah Boston and Caitlin Clark. It's going to be interesting. If South Carolina can shut down Caitlin Clark, I think they'll definitely win, but it'll be tight and it'll be good to see right up the road in Dallas, actually. And then for LSU and Virginia Tech, obviously LSU, this is Kim Mulkey's first time making it back to the Final Four for the first time since Baylor, since she did with Baylor back in 2018. But she's the third coach in women's or men's history to lead two different programs to a Final Four, which is really impressive and good for them. And also Angel Reese, she's been going off, setting 32 double doubles in the season, which is insane and out of this world. So they're definitely a force to be reckoned with, but they're going up against Virginia Tech, who hadn't made an NCAA tournament ever, or just once before, and it was not very frequent that they'd made the tournament a couple years ago. And then after they're following up their Sweet 16 appearance from last year, now with their first Final Four in program history, which is amazing for them. And they're led by Georgia Moore, Elizabeth Kidley, and a couple Taylor Sewell, I think. And they definitely have been overshadowed by a couple of teams, and they were definitely overshadowed and not really picked to come out of their own bracket that they were the number one seed in, because UConn was there and also Ohio State. That was some tough teams in their bracket, I do think, but overall they're a very, very, very solid team, and honestly not one to be slept on. And but I do think, I'm not entirely sure who I think is gonna be in the national championship. I do think that South Carolina Iowa would be a better national championship game, but fortunately we're getting it just in general, and I'm glad we are. I do think the women's tournament just in general was really, really, really crazy, but it was a little more calmer definitely than the men, as we do have two number one seeds, a 2 seed, and a 3 seed in the Final Four. So it's safe to say that it definitely calmed down after the Sweet 16, or with the exception of Miami. I I think things calm down for the women for sure. We have a fantastic Final Four lined up. I'm excited to watch both games. And yeah, so I hope you all tune in. They're going to be on ESPN tomorrow. Virginia Tech and LSU play at 7. And then after that at 9, South Carolina and Iowa will be playing. Both of those are in Eastern time, so check your time zones accordingly. But thank you for joining me in another episode of Halftimes and Harmonies. I hope you all have a fantastic day. And so with that, I say au revoir, ciao, adios, and goodbye.